Okay, everyone, my last mixing demo was cut off partway through. Luckily, I was just at the beginning, so it's fine. This is a neutral that I am mixing from Burnt Umber and Ultramarine Blue. Okay, so I'm mixing a very dark neutral. Trying to get something that's in between those two colors. Now I am mixing out my colors and values for a reflective painting study. So I have a reflective object, a little copper bowl, and then a shallot. They're very similar in color, but the copper bowl is highly reflective. So it's a kind of warm brown that we'll be looking at today, and then also an ultramarine blue kind of tablecloth. So, okay, so first I'm going to start by mixing out, this neutral, which is something I can use both for the really dark shadow areas within the tablecloth, and I'll use to mix out some values for that tablecloth, that ultramarine blue tablecloth, but it's also a neutral that is going to be really useful for creating the shadows for the copper bowl and for the shallot as well. Okay, so let's mix out some different values of this blue. So I'm going to take some of this neutral, bring it down. I'm also going to go grab some of this blue. Now this kind of pure blue like that is going to be about right here. And then I can mix some other values in between using the neutral to darken the blue. Now the ultramarine blue is already quite dark itself. Okay, so let's mix one more in between these two, and then I'll be using white as a way of lightening the ultramarine blue. Okay, I'm also going to add a bit of this neutral that I have on my palette knife right into this pile of blue, so I want to neutralize that a little bit. The tablecloth is very close to ultramarine blue, but it's a little bit neutralized, so I don't want to use just the ultramarine blue straight out of the tube necessarily. Okay, now let's put some steps down. Okay, so mixing out a nice little value scale for our tablecloth. I'll just observe that. There's not a lot of really bright areas of sort of highlight in the blue tablecloth, so I don't need a ton of this really light value. Okay. But there are these other areas that are in between. So I'm actually going to go through and mix some bigger piles of these other light values that I'll need more of. Okay. Then I want something in between here and here. So, and I want a bigger pile of it too, because I'm seeing more of this kind of mid-tone blue happening. So I'm going to grab some of these blues from up here, and I'm going to grab, let's grab even more, and I'm going to grab more white. Okay. Now remember, ultramarine blue is a cool color. Adding white to it, of course, helps to lighten it, but it doesn't change that temperature, right? So that's blue, this cool color is not a color that we have to be really concerned about the effect that white has on it. However, we'll have to think when we're mixing out the lighter values for the copper bowl and for the shallot. Now there's definitely areas where I'm going to be mixing out values with white, but there's also, I just want to be aware of white's effect and aware of the chroma of the color that I'm trying to mix, right? So that's something you always want to consider as you're mixing out these value scales, right? Think through the different properties of color, so the hue, the temperature, the value, and the chroma. Okay, and let's mix one more kind of step in between here. Okay. Alright, there's a nice little value scale to start off. And if I need to make adjustments when I start painting and realize I need another pile of maybe darker blue or something, I can do that as I see fit. Okay, so let's move on to our coppery colors. Okay, so the copper bowl and the shallot are very similar colors, so we can even just be mixing one value strain. There's parts of the shallot that maybe go a little bit more chromatic than the copper bowl, so we'll mix that all out together. Okay, so let's start by getting some burnt umber. So this is kind of a warmish brown, right? So we want to get our burnt umber. You can get also some of the cadmium red. I'm also going to be putting in a little bit of alizarin crimson because it's kind of rosy as well, and then some yellow ochre to also warm this brown up and to lighten it. Okay, and one thing that's going to be really essential for this painting, we're working with a reflective object, which can be kind of difficult or even just kind of intimidating to work with. Now, you want to remember to be looking for, concentrating on value, concentrating on color, and the shapes that you're seeing. So focus on these sort of abstract shapes that you're seeing within the object rather than, oh, I'm trying to paint this reflective object and it's really difficult. So instead, you want to be focusing on what are the shadow shapes, what are the light shapes, and take your time, work from dark to light, and that's how you're going to end up making a successful painting of this reflective object. Okay, so getting a nice warm brown, so I'm both going to make some lighter and warmer versions, warming it up with more yellow and red, and then I'm going to make some darker versions too using this neutral. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. Okay, we have this warm brown. I'm going to bring some more back up, maybe a couple of steps in here, and then same thing going down. Okay, and I'm cleaning off my palette knife as I go, so I'm not contaminating my original sources of color. Okay, so I'm grabbing some of this neutral and using that to create the really dark portions. Now what's also happening with this object, which is going to be fun to explore, is the blue tablecloth is reflecting in the surface of the copper bowl. So we're going to be taking some of these blues that we mixed and putting that directly into the copper object that we're painting. Okay, then I'm going to take that, mix it down. So some different values in between. Alright, and now I'm also going to grab more yellow and a little bit more red too. I'm going to start off with that, see what it looks like. I might also be adding some of these other yellows and reds on our palette, but I want to test this out first. So again, this is from this burnt umber, cadmium red, yellow ochre, and I'm using the reds and the yellows to create some lighter, more chromatic lights. And there's also some lights that I'm going to be mixing using white for those areas of reflected light, or not reflected light, sorry, areas of highlight where it's very bright and very close to white. Okay, great. So I'm even going to mix out, let's put that right there, and I'm going to mix out another version that has a little bit more yellow in it. So I see that both in the copper bowl and in the shallot. I'm even adding a little bit of the cadmium yellow, which is very bright and very chromatic. Let's add a little bit of the cadmium red too. Okay, nice. Okay, all right, and then we're going to mix. Let's take some of these and mix it up so we get something in between here and here. Okay, and then in the shallot, I also see some areas that go quite yellow, both on both ends of the shallot. So I'm even going to grab some more of this, bring it down, add more yellow into it. Adding more yellow into it, bring it down again, and then I'm going to add some white into here. So that will be for the ends of the shallot. Okay. And let's mix another, well, we're going to mix a few different really light values with white. So I'm going to take some of that, I'm going to mix another sort of highlight. Now there are some kind of bright golden sort of highlights. I'm going to take more of this cadmium yellow, more of the yellow ochre, grab a lot more of the white. I'm going to leave that and mix an even brighter version as well with more white. Because especially in the copper bowl, there's a bright highlight on the right-hand side. Kind of has a gold rim, and then it's very white on the kind of interior of the highlight. Okay, and then there's also some really bright light areas that are a little bit more sort of rosy and warm. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this and add some white into that to get more of these rosy lights. Let's add a little bit more yellow and a little bit more cadmium red in there. Okay, let's push it a little bit rosier, so I'm even going to grab just a tiny bit of the alizarin crimson Don't overdo it with the alizarin crimson adding it to this because it is a darker red, right? But we do want it to go a little bit rosy. Okay, so let's see. So we have a nice spectrum of these warm browns to address the copper bowl and the shallot. We have a nice spectrum of these blues to address the tablecloth and the shadows on the tablecloth. Now one last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this brown, bring it right here, and I'm going to grab some of this blue, and I'm mixing a little pile of the blue color that I'm seeing reflected in the copper bowl. So if I'm looking at that blue reflected, it's not as chromatic as the blue on the tablecloth. So I'm adding it into that coppery color from the bowl, which is going to neutralize it a bit. Okay, let's move this up a little bit, and I'm just going to mix one lighter version of this as well. Okay. So let's just grab a little bit of this white blue to lighten that up. Okay, and now we've addressed in our mixing the majority of the values and colors that are in the painting. As you're painting, if you realize you need a particular color, need more of a particular color, take a moment, pause, and mix that out. Mix a little pile for yourself rather than just trying to mix it with your brush. It's going to be an easier thing long term over the course of the painting to mix that way. Okay guys, have fun.